Hi. About a year ago, I picked up this, the Dungeons & Dragons Anthology, the Master Collection, which includes Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, Temple of Elemental Evil, and a bunch of other expansion packs and games that were made a little over 10 years ago. Now, I played all of these games back when they came out, and I really wanted to relive them, but I primarily bought this for Baldur's Gate 2, but the game that I really ended up becoming fascinated with all over again was Planescape Torment. Now, I played this game many years ago, a couple of times, over 10 years ago when it first came out, but I hadn't really touched it since then, and playing it really got me interested once again in the world of Planescape in Dungeons & Dragons, and I really, really love Planescape. And so I wanted to start doing a little series about it. Now, what is Planescape? Well, it's a little bit hard to explain. It's a Dungeons & Dragons campaign setting, sort of like the Forgotten Realms or Ravenloft or something like that, except it's very, very different. You see, the two that I just mentioned, Forgotten Realms and Ravenloft or Spelljammer or anything like that, what they do is take one tiny little section of the Dungeons & Dragons universe and create a place for adventures to go to. So they narrow the focus. The Dungeons & Dragons world is not really just a world or a planet like Middle-earth. It's a gigantic universe filled with hundreds of planets, countless people, all sorts of beings and deities and places to go and things to do. It's not just one world or planet or set of planets. It's an entire universe. In fact, it's a multiverse with multiple different planes of existence on it. And rather than just focus on one of these, which is what a campaign setting usually does, Planescape rather looks outward and simply adds all of the different settings together, and all of the different places are made open to you, rather than just locking you off into one little section like Ravenloft or Ebertoril or something like that. So instead of one world, you have hundreds of worlds and hundreds of different planes and existences and universes and all sorts of things like that. And it gets even more confusing from there, so please bear with me. The Dungeons & Dragons cosmology is divided up into three separate parts. One are the inner planes, and these are the different planes of existence that provide the building blocks, the materials of existence, like the plane of fire, the plane of earth, the plane of air, the plane of cadmium. That last one I might be wrong about. But they provide lightning, air, positive energy, negative energy, all of the different things that make up the material universe that we live in. So, for instance, the plane of Earth is a gigantic, literally infinite amount of earth and stone and rocks and dust and all sorts of things like that. And the plane of fire is just endless fire. It's not like hell where there's a lot of fire and lava. No, it's just literally crafted of fire, maybe with little pockets of air or earth here or there, but it's mostly just gigantic amounts of fire or the plane of air, etc., etc. Second, we have the prime material plane, and that's the most easy to understand. That's where Middle-earth would be in the Dungeons & Dragons sense. That's where the Forgotten Realms are. That's where the vast majority of Dungeons & Dragons takes place, in the standard, regular universe that we all know and love. And there are hundreds of different planets in the prime material world. It's not just one place, but that's what that's what we think of when we think of Dungeons & Dragons. It has the most standard type of elements and gameplay elements in it. Now, beyond that, we have what is in some ways the opposite of the inner planes, the outer planes, as the name might imply. Instead of being the physical makeup of the universe, the outer planes are a series of dimensions that make up the intellectual, spiritual, philosophical, and faith-based parts of the universe, and as such are very, very powerful. The outer planes are essentially made up and powered by belief. If you believe in something, then it has power. in the Outer Planes. And the Outer Planes are divided up into 16 parts, each corresponding to a certain philosophical outlook based on alignment in Dungeons & Dragons. So for instance, there's a lawful good plane or a chaotic evil plane, filled mostly with those kinds of creatures. The Outer Planes are also where the gods live, so there's the equivalent of heaven and hell in the Outer Planes. And there's literally every kind of deity there. There's Egyptian deities, Greek deities, Norse deities, the deities that Dungeons & Dragons made up, the deities of dwarves, of elves, of humans, and of everything. All exist somewhere in the Outer Planes. They have their homes there. There's Asgard, there's Mount Olympus, etc., or their equivalents. There's also the foulest pits of hell and the Abyss and Carceri, and just the darkest, most evil places, and also the best good places. Now, as I said, there are 16 parts, 5 planes representing good, 5 representing evil, and 6 in between these representing various degrees of neutrality. And there's also a sort of a 17th section. It's not exactly a plane like the other ones are. It's more like the other planes are a series of numbers of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and this other plane called the Outlands is the 0. To correspond to the numbers, the neutral setting in the very middle between all of the other planes. And what Planescape allows you to do is to roam these vast stretches of the Outer Planes, interact with gods. You can do, it's hard to say what you can do in Planescape, because it'd be easier to say what you can't do, because you could literally do anything. Let's say you're a bug up your butt one day, and you wanted to fight Anubis. Guess what? You have every right to go do that. You can do that. You can call that monster that eats the hearts of humans that are supposedly unworthy and send them to hell. You could call him a jackal-faced pussy. You can fight him. You probably shouldn't, because you're probably going to lose and die, but you could if you wanted to. Rather than being one setting, Planescape rather opens up every kind of setting in a huge miscellany that allows you to explore what is essentially the afterlife. The planes, in addition to being the homes of the gods, are also the home where people go when they die. So if you die and you're good, you'll go to some sort of heaven, and if you're evil, you'll go to some sort of hell. It's not like you can say that, oh, this is a dwarf kingdom and it's full of dwarves. No, it's full of everything. Every creature, every kind of being, every race, every class, everything in Dungeons & Dragons exists somewhere out in these planes, which, by the way, are literally infinite in size. They are huge. They're powered by belief, by the amorphous mass of what we think is real. That's what creates the planes, and that's why gods and belief have so much power out there. Now, you can do standard stuff like going and do dungeon crawls and going to find treasure and fighting monsters and things like that. But what Planescape really does is to take everything in D&D and bring it onto the biggest macro level that you possibly can. Rather than focusing on one little area, it focuses on literally everything. And the strategic rather than tactical level of the fight versus good and evil. All of the planes in the Outer Planes are constantly in some kind of conflict with one another, between good and evil, law and chaos, between different interpretations of good or evil. Sometimes the people on the same plane can't quite agree as to what they actually believe or what they actually should do about their beliefs. And belief is a central tenet of Planescape. To illustrate the power of belief in the more mutable Outer Planes, there's a great short segment of the Sandman comics that Neil Gaiman did years ago about cats, and the story was about a cat that fell asleep and went to the dream world with the Sandman, Morpheus, and learned the secret history of cats, which is that untold aeons in the past, they were actually the dominant species on Earth and ruled over humans who were their pets, and they owned these creatures and feasted and hunted them. And at one point, one of the humans decided that they were going to gather together all of the humans and have them think the same thing and the same desire and have the same belief at the same time. And eventually the more and more people that got it, the more and more people that believed, the more and more that made that true in the real world. And eventually not only did humans become the dominant species and cats their pets, but they erased the former history so that it had never been that way. That story is a perfect example of how belief can shape and change the world in Planescape. Planescape is very metaphysical. It has a lot to do with philosophy, with religion, with belief, with thought turning into action. So it's very different from the standard RPG in that way. One of the great things about Planescape is how much you can affect the world through affecting people's belief. You're not just going to be killing your way to success. You can't really do that in most cases because you can't destroy all of hell. You can't destroy all of heaven or eradicate a plane with force of arms. What you have to do is try to convince as many people as possible to think in a certain way, and sometimes that involves providing an example of good or being an exemplar of evil. And changing the way people think and the way people act and deciding how you feel and think and act and how your character should act based on these situations is part of the fun of Planescape. A lot of people wouldn't necessarily find that fun. I don't think the Skyrim crowd would be all that into it. But if you want something a little deeper and a little more meaningful out of your action-adventure fantasy RPG, Planescape is the way to go. You essentially have an infinity of things to do. As a planewalker, you're going to be traveling frequently through portals across the entire planes, going to hell, going to heaven, going through every strange, weird, bizarre, fun, crazy place that you can imagine, interacting with deities, talking with any kind of bizarre creature you can think of. It's this sheer metropolitanism of the planes that makes the game fun. You can be doing something different every single session. Nothing feels the same. You always feel like you are at the heart of something wild and fun and mysterious. It's really a pleasure to play Planescape, especially because of the depth that's involved with choosing alignments and how you believe and think and act. Choosing how your character morally feels is one of the keystones of Planescape, and it really is shameful to think that something like Mass Effect or Dragon Age has somehow cornered the video game equivalent of morality, because in the old Planescape universe, that was a really deep, difficult, and hard to grasp issue of morality. It was like the real world. You couldn't really get a good handle on morality. Two people could believe in essentially the same religion or philosophy, but have vastly different beliefs about how that was to be carried out. And that's all part of the wonderful world of Planescape. It's working out these bizarre philosophical differences in this amazing fantasy backdrop. Now I'm going to go more in depth in subsequent videos about Planescape, but I just wanted to give this little introductory piece for someone who has never really heard of Planescape before, doesn't really know what it is, and maybe wants to get into it, which I highly recommend, because I love Planescape, and I'll explain more why in other videos.